So the Student Press Law Center was set up in 1974 basically to be a counterweight to school authority when young people didn't feel like anybody else was on their side. The whole idea was to provide a center of legal expertise that students and their teachers could turn to if they're having any problem at all with exercising and protecting their legal rights. Censorship is certainly the #1 thing that we work on and respond to, but we respond to a range of problems that students have at both the high school and the college level. We've done everything from get people out of jail when they were arrested while covering demonstrations, get their cameras back from police when they were confiscated, review their stories in advance when they're sensitive to make sure there is no libel or no privacy invasion or no copyright infringement. And so we do a variety of services, basically just like the New York Times or the Washington Post has an in-house legal department of lawyers that advise them on sensitive matters. We're sort of the legal department for student media around the country.
Can you just talk about why you think the new Voices legislation is so important in general?
If you asked me what state has created the most censorship problems for us at the Student Press Law Center in recent years, I would not hesitate before saying New Jersey. So in 1988, the Supreme Court kind of rewrote the ground rules of the First Amendment in schools. They took away from students the discretion to make their own editorial judgments and publications. Well, we've been through an entire generation now of people who were governed by that Supreme Court case, Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer. And after a generation, I think everybody sat back and took stock and realized that Hazelwood just turned out to be too much school authority. It's a standard that's out of whack and out of balance, and the pendulum needs to swing back. Students learn best when they're governed by a light hand of guidance and not by a heavy hand of censorship. And unfortunately, what we've seen is too many schools will be tempted to use that degree of censorship authority for purposes of PR image control, not because it's educationally justified, but because they're concerned about bad news about the school getting out to the community. One particularly bad case happened a couple of years ago. A student editor named Adelina Kalaku called us because she had been told that she couldn't publish a story that she'd gotten just by attending a school board meeting, taking good notes, and listening to what was going on. There was a controversy involving the renewal of her school superintendent's contract. This is exactly the kind of news that the community needs to hear to stay informed, but Adelina was forbidden from publishing it, and in fact was even told she would be punished if she took the story off campus to an independent news outlet. It took 3 months of haggling and negotiating where lawyers had to get involved, and finally on the last day before school adjourned, the school took off the restriction and allowed the story to be published, but by then it was too late. The decisions had already been made at the school board. And so that's the kind of example of public interest journalism that's being suppressed by school censorship.
Can you discuss what exactly the new Voices legislation in New Jersey would ensure for students and as well their teachers?
I think it's really important first for people to understand what the legislation does not do. What it does not do in any way is place student publications on the same plane as the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. It's certainly not an anything goes law. All it does is restore a sensible middle ground, the balance that existed for many years before the Supreme Court decided its Hazelwood case in 1988. What it does is it gives a school district or a principal a limited list of the grounds for which a publication can be censored. And these are all the things that schools and districts will tell you that they want the authority to remove. Libel, invasion of privacy, threats, things that might incite a disturbance or cause people to violate the law. Those are things that nobody wants to see published, including the student editors. And so it's totally sensible to allow that degree of discretion. But what we want to do is limit the school's authority to overrule student editors when it's just matters of editorial taste and judgment involving the image of the school. That's the kind of censorship that makes our phone ring at SPLC hundreds and hundreds of times a year, and it's the kind of censorship that a new Voices law would make illegal. And very, very importantly, these new Voices laws will protect teachers and faculty advisors at the college level against being retaliated against. Unfortunately, we've seen too many occasions, including here in New Jersey, where teachers and advisors have lost their jobs for doing nothing but just training young people to do excellent quality journalism. And we saw this happen a few years ago at Ocean County College here in New Jersey, where a very, very supportive advisor, Karen Bosley, was pushed out of her job for retaliatory reasons because her students had published investigative coverage of the college. After she was forced out of her job, the newspaper just became a hollow shell, and it practically doesn't even exist today without her presence and support. And that's often the way that colleges and schools crack down on investigative and inquisitive reporting through the manipulation of that faculty advisor who's at their mercy. And so we need laws protecting them against image-motivated retaliation.
And can you guys touch on the difference between prior review and prior restraint? Because I know that sometimes is a gray area where people get confused.
Sure. So a new voices law does not tie the hands of a school or a district to do a brief period of prior review if all they're reviewing for is libel and invasion of privacy and other legally risky things. They can still have the discretion to do that if they so choose. Prior restraint is when you cross the line from reviewing something for unlawful content to actually directing students not to distribute a publication or not to include a particular article in it. So prior review, while a lot of advisors will tell you they don't do it as a matter of good educational practice, is not something that the law forbids. The law definitely disfavors the exercise of prior restraint. In the real world outside of school, the Supreme Court has told us that you can't engage in the prior restraint of a news publication for anything short of the most dire emergency circumstances. I think it's really important to emphasize that New Voices laws have been in effect around the country for many, many years. This is not something that New Jersey is being asked to climb out on a limb all by itself or do something that's dangerous or experimental. We now have 10 states that have laws, and California's goes all the way back to 1977. So we have many, many decades of experience around the country with these laws that proves that they're safe, they're effective, they don't cause any harm, and in fact, not one state legislature has ever entertained a bill to repeal one of these laws after it was on the books. So that tells you that schools and districts get used to it very quickly.
And can you talk about why student organizations are so important when they're trying to get this word across as well?
I've been to about 6 state capitals in the year 2016 to testify on New Voices bills, and having watched these hearings for myself, I can tell you that the voice that is the most persuasive, the voice that is the most listened to, is the voice of the student editor. We've had amazing students like Janine Castedo in Rhode Island, who basically ran the entire New Voices of Rhode Island movement herself, and I've watched people like Janine go testify in front of their House and Senate committees, and when they do, the opposition just melts away. I think if you look back to the Hazelwood case and the rationale for it, this was all unfolding back in the early and mid-1980s. The articles that were at issue in the Hazelwood case were published in 1985. So think about the world in 1985. Think about what the world was like. Think about what schools were like, what kids were like. It was totally possible in 1985 that you could insulate teenagers from finding out about teenage pregnancy or deadbeat dads by ripping pages out of a paper newspaper. It was possible to insulate them and wall them off from that knowledge. But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in 2016, we live in a social media saturated world where nobody has learned about teenage pregnancy by reading it in the pages of a newspaper. That's just a fantasy. And so since we can't wall off young people from information anymore, you're bombarded with information in every waking hour of your life. Since we can't wall people off from information, the best thing we can do is to teach you how to navigate that information fire hose that you're drinking out of, to teach people how to separate truth from fiction, rumor, gossip, speculation, right? How to be good, informed, educated consumers of news. Well, that starts with high quality journalism in schools. And so the idea that somehow censorship could protect young people from being exposed to controversial or sensitive or mature topics is just a relic of a past that we don't live in anymore. And so it's just time to modernize our legal system and to bring it up to date with the way that people actually consume information today. And the most important thing is that students are coming together, building organizations like the student GSSPA to try to make their voices heard in an organized way. And so I think it's only a matter of weeks or months before it gets called up in committee. I think the sponsors will call it up when they're convinced that the support has coalesced and has come together. But we feel pretty optimistic and pretty confident given the strength of the sponsorship. There are both Democratic and Republican supporters, which is really important. There is unanimous support in the professional journalism community, which is really important. The SPJ, the Society of Professional Journalists, is a very strong organization in New Jersey, and they've rolled up their sleeves and gotten to work on it. So we think New Jersey's a really promising state.